Hi everyone, Raphael Harry here, and you're listening to White Label American, a podcast where we hear stories from an immigrant or two, sometimes more. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show. Okay, welcome to another episode of White Label American. Hope everyone is doing well and staying safe out there. Shout out to everybody on the front lines, and especially those who are making life easier for those of us who have to stay at home. Appreciate each and every one of you, and send our loves to to you and your family, and sending loves to everyone who's been sharing the podcast and giving us 5 stars. Appreciate you all. Thank you. Today's guest is someone who has an organization that first time I saw the organization, I was like, wow, this is something that speaks a lot to me, but I don't know how to just describe it, but there's something that is you have this feeling that's always been a part of you, of wanting to connect people, but not knowing how to, or in a way, but it's just been there, and then you see that someone has already started doing it in a way that makes sense, and you're like, yes, this is it, and honestly, if I had the means to just throw billions at them, I would definitely would. But when you guys get to the organization, you definitely understand why I'm so excited to have today's guest. So without much further ado, I introduce Walla Elsheihk. She's the co-founder and CEO of Birthright Africa, an organization committed to providing free educational trips to Africa for all youth and young adults of African descent. She has been in both private and public sectors, has spent 10 years supporting various college and career readiness initiatives in both the K-12 and post-secondary educational spaces. She's been the former interim executive director of schools, that can NYC, and has served as program director, internship coordinator, and strategic consultant to small and large educational nonprofits in New York and Washington, D.C. And there's so much more about Walla. She's lived in multiple countries before immigrating to New York City. And we'll get to all that in the episode. But you guys don't hear about me. You guys want to hear about Walla. So we'll dive straight to Walla. So welcome to the podcast, Walla. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be joining. The weather is great now in New York City, and it puts me in a really good mood.
Glad to hear that. And it's our pleasure having you here today.
Mm-hmm.
So let's begin. Where were you born, and what was childhood like for you?
So I was born in Sudan, where I was raised for about 2.5 years of my life, broken up. So I never really experienced Sudan fully culturally. I was born in Sudan, and 9 months later, we end up traveling and moving to Sweden. And in Sweden, we were there for about 6-7 years before I got to go back to Sudan at the age of 1. And at the age of 1, I started learning English for the first time at like a British American school while being, trained in my Arabic, obviously from home.
Yeah.
And then a year later, we were whisked away to Uganda. So my dad was a diplomat at the time for the Sudanese government. That was a big part of my childhood, getting to travel because of my dad's work and where he was placed. In Uganda, I went to an American international school called Lincoln International School. I remember that pretty vividly. At that point, I'm like 8-9 years old, learning English in school and really learning how to read and write for the first time from American teachers, which is actually very critical in my upbringing. And so, which I'll share in a moment. And then the government of Sudan was taken over by Bashir, who we just recently ousted. But at the time in 1989, that was happening. My dad was let go of his position. We go back to Sudan. So at the age of 10, I returned after not being there for a couple of years. And at 10, I went back to the British American school, got my education for the 4th grade. And then my dad got a job at the UN in New York City. And that's how we ended up coming to America as I was going on the age of 11. And so that was a seamless transition because I had been to an American international school in Uganda. And so I come here with no accent. People think I've been born and raised in America all my life.
Oh.
Yeah, until they see my name, they ask me where I'm from. And I basically recount this whole story that I just shared with you now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in Sudan, you were born in Khartoum?
No, I was born in Kosti, which is about 4, 5, 6 hours south of Khartoum. That's where the majority of my family is from. But when I would be living in Sudan, we would live in Khartoum.
All right.
We lived in the major city in like an apartment building. And I remember that vividly. We actually ended up in the same apartment building when I was 7 and then again at 10. And of course, we would go visit family, you know, and stay for a few weeks to a month at a time in Kosti and then come back. But yeah, we ended up in the same apartment, I guess, because, you know, the arrangement was there.
It's a lot easier to make such arrangements back home. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm assuming the government probably coordinated all that because all our housing was, you know, associated with my dad being a diplomat.
Yeah.
All my housing, all my schooling. I was privately educated overseas. It wasn't until we got to America that I went to public education. And my parents actually chose America specifically because they felt that it was free quality education. Because prior to that, you know, private education was paid for. They coming here, they weren't going to be able to pay for education. So where could you get some kind of quality education? And my mom specifically chose Queens as the borough, as opposed to Brooklyn. Sorry, Brooklyn.
I won't take it.
So Brooklyn gets all the love all the time in New York City, but my mama said, nope, we're going to pay an extra $200 of rent so that I can have my children go to this, you know, kind of schooling. And I loved the neighborhood that I grew up in. I'm actually really thankful for her choice. Briarwood, Jamaica, specifically in Queens, is very diverse.
Yeah, I've heard about Queens being the most diverse borough in America. And I don't know, that was a few years ago. I saw that statistics. I don't know if it still stands to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. The most diverse, I think over 180 languages are spoken. And, you know, we have diversity, but we still have some segregated parts. You know, New York City is known for diversity, but we definitely have segregation within.
I see it in my neighborhood too.
You see that, right?
With the public schools.
Especially with the public schools.
Yeah.
But what was beautiful about Briarwood, and I'm actually getting chills talking about this, is we were diverse within the neighborhood. And that was what also made the transition to America so seamless for me, is because I had been to an international school, an American international school. So I was going to school with kids that were the children of ambassadors and diplomats from all over the world. So I was used to multiculturalism as my day-to-day of life. Like, I didn't understand racial difference. I understood national difference and ethnic difference per se, but racial difference wasn't like the main thing. And so in a lot of ways, I was very comfortable with just having so many different types of people around me, and I loved it. So coming to Briarwood specifically was just like another version of my American international schooling. And, you know, growing up in all of these countries, there's so much American culture that you get through the media. So I was very familiar with America growing up. And I was very used to traveling to different countries as just a part of my life. I mean, I was watching The Cosby Show at 4 years old in Sweden with the italics in Swedish, right? I'm probably not reading Swedish at that point, but the point being, I'm exposed to Cosby. I'm exposed to all the music, Michael Jackson, Diana Ross, Tina Turner. My parents had friends that would record cassette tapes. Yes, I am that old. I was born in 79.
Well, I still grew up with cassette tapes.
Right, of like Whitney Houston, right? And the Kool and the Gang, like entire cassette albums, Madonna. I didn't even know it at the time, but we were listening to these young guys. I didn't know if they were guys or girls, but I found out once I get to America, it was New Edition. Like we had a lot of the music and the entertainment. So when we learned, I can imagine when I learned I was coming to America, it was like, oh, great. I get to go to the land of where I love this music.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay, so with all that, where does your most exciting or fondest childhood memory come from?
So I had to think about that a little bit because, there's definitely been a few, although I will say there were definitely moments of a lot of boredom. So there's kids, and this actually came up in the whole analysis of this crisis and why Generation X is actually doing pretty well. I don't know if you read this article. But before I talk about my childhood memory, I'm just thinking about all the times I was bored for some weird reason, because there's this perception when you live in diplomatic life that it's so great and you have access to many resources and whatnot. But honestly, we were in Uganda where I just found out from my dad, there was a lot of tension. There was a lot of civil tension. So we weren't allowed to go outside of our big house, right? And even though I was privileged to be chauffeured to school in a Mercedes Benz, we never went to people's houses to have, kid play dates. I didn't have my cousins and my aunts and uncles to go visit. No. And I didn't have my toys from Sudan. My parents, all African kids know, they shipped everything to Sudan in a container next to the house they're building.
Yeah.
Right? And so my toys are not there. So literally, and this actually perfectly aligns with what my childhood memories were about. Everything for me that was joyous was around music. For me, I love to dance. So at 6 years old, I remember just being in my apartment in Sudan in particular, in Khartoum, just dancing around the living room, right? Putting on that cassette tape and just having the greatest time, feeling free and just enjoying this American music. My fondest memories is this really cool thing we would do with my aunt. So my mom's sister, and I, along with my sister, who was only a year younger, we would put on the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. I kid you not. Had that on cassette tape. It is my favorite soundtrack of all time. And now I'm realizing why. Not only do I love disco, very interesting, random fun fact about me. Yes, I feel like I was born in the wrong decade. I should have been born
I think I know
in the early 60s, so I could have really been a teen and appreciated disco. I have a disco playlist in my Spotify. People are like, oh, wow, you are really a fan. Yes, I am. So Saturday Fever, and it was we would stand in the corners of the living room. So my aunt would be in one corner, I would be on another, and my sister would be on another corner. And we would take turns dancing for each other. And then as soon as you were done with your couple of minutes of dancing, you would point to the next person who was supposed to dance. And you would just do that for I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 songs.
Yeah.
And I remember being so happy.
I remember, from the it wasn't Saturday Night Fever, the one I used to
that's the one with John Travolta.
The Motown, was it Motown? There was a Motown show, because they used to have these music shows. I don't know what they were called, but it was like a music show. It was just dance. There was music playing and people would dance.
Oh, you're talking about Soul Train?
Soul Train, yes.
Soul Train, yeah. So listen, when I came to America,
that's what you reminded me of when you pointed to one person and then you dance. I completely forgot about that, but my mom still does that nowadays. She's 80.
Really?
So every time they send me videos of the family back home, because she has had surgery on her knees and all that, so she uses a walker, but she still forces the kids to dance in pattern. And you dance in a circle and then you dance in a circle, and then they don't try to, because of the conservative thing that they still try to adapt to in the family. without
Mm-hmm.
claiming that, oh, we all did discos in the 70s. And I've seen the diaries of some of them. So I know the secret is out now. But the
I was
younger
gonna say
ones
the
don't
same
know.
thing, and
You
they
know?
wouldn't let us go to any kind
Yeah,
of
but
parties.
I
And
found that out later on. I was like, oh, so this is where it comes from. And then I found old photos of the afros and the mini skirts,
Mhm.
the tights and all that.
All of that.
Yeah, but when we used to watch those programs, then you start seeing that, oh, they start putting two and two together. And like, oh, so the older ones in the families, they used to go to those dances. And then
Yep.
that's why some of them still do that when we gather and they're like, oh, you form the circle and then you dance or form a straight line, two people on each side. And I'll be having memories of some parties with just flashbacks. Like, oh,
Mhm.
in this person's birthday party, we did this. Everybody was on one side, two sides, there was two lines. And then
Okay.
you jump in the middle and dance, and then I don't want to dance. So you jump in the middle and dance, and then you jump in the middle and dance. And then we did the Soul Train thing in our houses. We did it.
I didn't know about Soul Train until I got to America, but you can imagine I fell in love. I was like,
Oh, they used to
what?
show it on Nigerian TV every Saturday. I
We
think it
didn't
was
have,
national TV.
yeah, no, I didn't have American TV coming in. Everything had to be recorded. But when I got to America, right,
Yeah.
so it's like 1990, September 6, 1990, we landed in JFK. I remember that day because it was 3 days before school started. And I remember Saturday mornings would be about Saturday cartoons and then Soul Train.
Saturday.
So it was literally Saturday cartoons and Soul Train. And I would be like dancing and jamming. I couldn't believe that there was a television show where people just danced. I was like, this is the best thing ever on regular TV. It was like Channel 11, not even cable. So that was like my routine to dance while I was cleaning.
Yeah. I don't remember what station had it. I think it was the state TV. I think National TV had Soul Train, and then state TV had some other version that wasn't Soul Train, but either from the European, either maybe from the UK, and then they'll show another version of a similar type. So it would be like maybe one from the UK and then one from maybe Germany or somewhere. But they have similar discos going around in other places. So you see like more white people dancing in one, the more mixed crowd in another. Then Soul Train will be more of the black people dancing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I saw all that. We had all that on national and state TVs because back then we only had two TVs, national and state, in Benin City where I was in Nigeria.
Oh, in Nigeria. See, I was gonna say, I think I don't remember seeing dance shows the way Soul Train was on a weekly basis. And for me to see all these Black people, it was just such a commonality. So, for me, it was just like having this pride that I can connect so seamlessly, not only with my multicultural background living in Briarwood, but this music that I was in love with R&B, pop, what have you. Then I had to learn and understand hip hop before I loved it. And that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, that hip hop, there's a whole different story because I never knew about hip hop until much.
Me neither. No, I think to America and I was like, what is this talking music? I don't understand it. But then I had cousins.
I stumbled onto it in Nigeria, but it took a while for me to.
I literally had no clue about it till I got here, and then didn't like it for 2 years. And then in '92, my cousins, because they weren't direct family, but my mom's college best friend's kids came to visit us in New York, and they were of course into hip hop because they grew up here. And I think it was OPP. Yep, it was OPP from Naughty by Nature that was like the number one hip hop song. And they were listening to it so much that I ended up liking it. And then I realized, oh, I can dance to this. Done. I was told I can dance to hip hop. That's all I need. And then I started obviously understanding the rhythms of the words and the catchiness, the rhymes. It was amazing.
Yeah, there were hip hop songs like OPP. MC Hammer was big, but I guess in the interpretation, we never, like my circle or people that were around, never identified it as hip hop to me per se. So it was all reggaeton, rubber dub were like the things that I was crazy about, especially in Benin City at that time. If you didn't play anything from rubber dub, from the Caribbeans at birthday parties, kids would start crying. Like we would just start crying. I still remember my birthday parties, they didn't play any of my reggaeton songs or the rubber dubs. And I got mad, like, when you go play it? When you go play it? And I got mad, and they're like, what happened? I said, oh, they haven't played Shabarang, so.
Oh, yeah, Shaba. Oh, you said it. Shaba was the first reggae artist I ever liked.
Go play one. I think I was crying. They played one.
I have a story about Shabarangs. Shabarangs, Mr. Loverman. First reggae song I ever liked. Yeah. Reggae.
Oh, Mr. Loverman, yeah.
Mr. Loverman. I got reggae right away. I felt it.
That was. Yeah. I don't. Meanwhile, they used to ban, like, Fela songs were banned most of my life as a kid. Okay. They were banned from the radios. A whole bunch of other artists, they were banned. But Mr. Lover was played all the time.
Interesting.
On state radio, national radio, state TV, like 7 p.m. You watch that every day. You watch it. So we all knew that song, and I'm like, I'm looking back, like, were kids supposed to be singing that song? I don't know.
But at the same time, it's reggae, right? And like, the rhythms are so smooth and very similar to like African rhythms.
Yeah.
So I got reggae right away. I felt it. I loved it.
Oh yeah, well, reggae was.
Immediately. It did not take a long time.
Although they still said if you had dreadlocks, you're a bad person. That was my.
I didn't even know. My parents didn't know about.
That was, if you had dreadlocks, you're bad. He smokes weed, that's a bad person.
That's unfortunately some of the messaging we used to get.
Yeah. But I mean, hip hop, like rap itself, proper. One reason why I hated it was because I used to have my cassette players. I recorded jazz without knowing the artist, and then when I had to go stay in Ibadan with my cousins, at my uncle's place, one of my cousins who was hardcore into Tupac and all the rap artists. Mm-hmm. I think I went away on a trip. And then I came back, and he couldn't find any cassette to record on. And for some reason, he recorded Tupac and all the rest on my jazz cassette. So I come back, and I'm like, oh, let me listen to my jazz. And I put my cassette on.
Yes.
I'm hearing yo. I'm like, oh, what is this? Oh, Busta Rhymes. I said, what is he busting? So that's the guy, man. He's hot right now. I said, what? Oh, I hear it. I was like, I don't hear this music. Don't talk to me about all my jazz. I never knew. I was the type who would just listen to music without knowing the artist's name. So a whole bunch of jazz songs, I just knew them without knowing who was the artist behind the music.
You just reminded me. I forgot that you have to be careful with cassette tape not to record over it.
Yeah, that's how I lost.
I messed up a couple of tapes that way.
That's how I lost tapes like that. So since we've talked about music a lot, mm-hmm. and you've been to a couple of places. Did you ever dabble into the local music?
Ooh, well, so interesting. Not so much in Sudan for some reason. A lot of the music there felt very old school. Like it was just a lot of older artists. And because my first recollections of music are from being in Sweden, I remember ABBA. And I am still a huge fan to this day.
They're cool.
They fulfilled a lot of that kind of like 70s disco pop vibe. And the fun fact, because of our diplomatic status, we were living in an apartment complex that had various apartment buildings. And apparently their building was across from us. Like my mom will tell me stories of like knowing and like feeling like she saw ABBA across from our apartment. So I would call that local because it's Swedish artists in Sweden, although they ended up going global, right? Outside of that, I don't remember much of Swedish music. We would participate in their Christmas rituals, even though we were Muslim. But you do what your countrymen do. So whatever the local Christmas music was, we were singing it. I don't remember it. I was too young to remember. Unfortunately, in Uganda, because we were so sheltered and there was so much civil unrest, my world was really American.
Okay.
It was really like, I don't recall engaging with local children or listening to local music or going to the market. Like the most I remember venturing outside was to like Entebbe Beach. In Kampala. Yep. But like when I tell you we were chauffeured everywhere, and then as young children, it was literally just home and school and we would go every now and then to one of our classmates' homes. Like I was learning to swim in someone else's home. But other than that, it was sheltered. Oh, we went to the country club.
That was the country club.
But
Yeah,
that's the country club. It was like,
swimming pools in Nigeria.
yeah, but it was such a privileged life. You know what I'm saying? Like it wasn't a local experience, which, as we'll talk about, really helped shape why I felt very disconnected myself to being an African. In Sudan, I would hear the local music when it was part of parties, but like, would I on my own put on a cassette tape to listen to Sudanese music? No. And we didn't have the internet and, you know, streaming or downloading to just easily access. You had to go buy and purchase.
Of course.
And, you know, it's whatever my parents listened to. And again, I just gravitated so much to more American and global English speaking artists.
During your time in Uganda, that was, was it Idi Amin that was still in charge?
No, so by that point, Museveni had come in.
Okay.
Yeah, it was like literally right before the switch, or right after the switch, I'm sorry, right after. But that's why there was still a little bit of tension.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So you arrived in the United States, and due to your background, you didn't really have, you it was a lot easier to adapt, and being that you were in Queens. But did you have any culture shocks?
I wouldn't call them culture shocks. I would just call them culture ignorances and awarenesses that I had to build. And a lot of that centers on, you know, like I said, there's this lack of consciousness around that you are Black, because you don't think of yourself that way in Africa. Everybody else around you is, for the most part. Or you've just, you know, for me, multiculturalism, it was centered around national difference and ethnic difference, not racial difference. So coming here, I was very oblivious. I didn't even really pick up on race until maybe like late middle school, early high school. And because most of my friends were immigrant background also. So I just identified with being an immigrant background, having that connection. It wasn't about like what racial background people are. But I would notice like I would be maybe the one or two only dark or Black kids, if you will. At that point, I don't know what my mind was thinking. And I just started to recognize, okay, there were some differences. There's this narrative around, you know, lack of opportunity or struggle. But it didn't make sense to me because my parents are coming to America to escape persecution, right?
Yes.
And to seek economic and educational opportunity. So to me, America was a place of opportunity. And when you're from the outside looking in, all the television stuff makes it look so great. Like people are, you know, eating well, they have these freedoms, they seem happy. And as a child, you don't have enough, you know, knowledge to discern that this is just media. Like the Cosby Show to me was like, oh, wow, this is an amazing family. They just happen to be Black. And then I get to continue to watch the show. And at that point, also in the 90s, there was like this real Black renaissance, if you will. Like, you know, we had The Different World, we had Martin, Living Single. I was seeing Black people in positions of professionalism, in education. So I'm growing up in a very sort of middle income, socioeconomic, diverse neighborhood. Like it wasn't the hood. So I'm not exposed to the elements that represent the racial struggle of this country until much later on in my early 20s. I start, you know, having more Black friends from the South or the Midwest, where the, you know, the racial experiences are much more stark. And they're telling me stories and sharing stories with me. And I mean, one of my friends, she could understand where my ignorances were coming from because she was Congolese American. But she grew up in Florida since being a young child and had gone to FAMU, you know, the HBCU. So she had an understanding and a Black consciousness. Basically, I didn't have any Black consciousness. And so at 22, at that point, I get to my corporate job. I'm working in finance on Wall Street. I'm about to I'm living the American dream, quote unquote, and talking about America in this way that it's such an amazing place to live and so civilized and boom. And she literally looked at me and was like, Walla, you're talking about this place being so exceptional, but do you understand what happened to Black people here? And I realized oh, wait a minute. No, I don't. I don't know the history.
Exactly.
Because ultimately they didn't teach it to us, right? You look back now at your education and you're like, oh, not only do I not know the history of America and Black people in America in that narrative, I don't even know my own history, my own African, my own Sudanese history.
True. That's it's an important point that you bring, because it's a valid point, because my guest from episode 30, she was born in Nigeria, and she moved here much earlier than I did. I moved here when I was an adult, and I was still in that same bubble, by the way. And I thought I was a little bit different because I already had certain viewpoints that were considered anti-Nigerian by most people around me, which is how they start viewing when you start saying, oh, I don't think all Black people in America are this way. And then but I still was anti-Black in a lot of thinking without even seeing myself in that light. But when she arrived here and she said, oh, she was never around Black people until she went to college. And then when she arrived in college, she now started oh, let me tell you how to be Black. She was like, in her words, the Kanye West before Kanye.
Okay.
She brought that to, and it was, luckily she met the right people who sat her down, were like, no, have you really met Black people? Do you even know the history? And that's when they started educating her, and she was like, oh, yeah, I don't really know much. I told her, that's true. I've, the past few years, I've had to rewire my brain to realize that, because I realized that I didn't really know anything. Because as a kid, in school, the education was, Martin Luther King fought for civil rights against racism, and
basically
he died. And as soon as he died, civil rights act was passed, and racism was cured. And South Africa, there was apartheid, yes, but it's gonna be cured one day. And because by then Mandela was still locked up, and then he got freed, and he was like, oh, it's done, free. And oh, okay. But you still didn't realize that there was discrimination around the British Empire. I mean, I had racism. I went through racism in Nigeria, and it would take my coming here. And then when I started knowing stuff, and I realized, oh, we were going through segregation we lived in a gated community.
Exactly.
It was a privileged life too. But there was segregation in the gated community, and then there was racism also going on, active racism, because one of the company that hired more than half of the buildings in the community, the most senior guy, if he wanted to use the swimming pool, none of us could be in the swimming pool with him because his skin color mix.
Wow.
So he shut it out. So the staff who worked there, they will be around the swimming pool, they will spread themselves around. So if we the kids try to sneak in, they'll be chasing us. And it would be years if I remember that, oh wait, there was a white guy who anytime he wanted to use the pool, we were not allowed. They would be chasing us around. Don't come near the pool. That man is the boss in the pool. He's not the boss of. And then the Pakistani guy who worked in the company, for the same company, they pushed him to our side because all of us, for some reason, the Nigerians live on the other side.
Right.
Yes, state. But these things you don't realize. Well, we're like, oh, we're all fancy because we live there. We live in the community, so we were top dogs. And then now I'm like, no, there was so many wrong things going on. But
I have an interesting story about that. Actually, that happened for me in my college dorming. So I didn't dorm my first 2 years. And I came to dorm in junior year. And I noticed, maybe because I was the first time dorming, they didn't realize I was not a freshman. But they put me with all these freshman girls. That was one thing. The next thing was we were all of color. And one of the apartments, one of my friends lived across the hall. And they were all white girls. They had a 2-bedroom.
Okay.
with a great, with the middle living room. We had a 1-bedroom and we were 5 people. We were all 5 in each apartment, but they thought it was okay to put 5 girls of color in a 1-bedroom apartment. So 2 of the girls had to sleep in the living room. So we really didn't have a living room.
Oh, wow.
It's stuff like that you're like,
Yeah.
Looking back, because at the time, I didn't have the consciousness. Yeah, at the time, at 20, let me tell you, I'm telling, when I look back now and I realize how I was growing up with white consciousness, is what I came here aspiring to have opportunity, very colorblind to myself. It's not even colorblind, right? In a lot of ways, when I thought all I needed to do was work hard, get good grades, get the job. Once I get the job, just do really well, perform, and everything should be, based on my performance and progressing that way. But that's, luckily my friend, I call it chin check me. That's what we used to say back in the day. She checked me on my thinking, because then I got that education. I started looking at the history of this country. I love documentaries. So a lot of the PBS documentaries helped me catch up. And I started just, again, getting to know my friends of African descent, whether they were Black American, Caribbean, African, who had grown up here, and they had either their own experiences, and in the case of my Black American friends, the generational stories to explain the experiences. And that's when I started to pick up a little bit on so I know now why I'm acting from a place of I can't make a mistake at work. Because if I make a mistake, then that may mess it up for the rest of us. That was actually happening to me, but I didn't know to call it a microaggression, right?
Yeah.
Or to feel like I have this maybe imposter syndrome of, do I belong here? Because I have not been taught or learned the history of us as innovators and creators and leaders.
Yep.
If you learn anything in the history, I remember, a little bit about slavery, but my junior high teacher swore slavery was not the reason for the Civil War. It was about states' rights. And now I'm like, yeah, but the state right they wanted was slavery. Come on. You learn about Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and Frederick Douglass if you're lucky. And then if your parents tell you, great, if you have those generational stories. But for Black immigrant kids like us, my parents couldn't explain racism. I asked them 2 years ago. They're like, we don't know how to explain racism. We don't even know what it looks like when it's happening, because they grew up in their own country.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay. So I had to do all this self-education and realize it's important to understand your history, culture. And for us as Black people to understand it beyond enslavement and colonization. It did not start with those 2 things. We were great civilizations. And luckily, Henry Louis Gates did that 6-part series on Africa's greatest civilizations. I learned things about my country, like the pyramids that we have in Sudan. And so that's important. And so that you develop this, asset-based narrative of who you are, and you don't have to feel like you have to change who you are or, overly switch your code, right? There's a level of professional code that you have to switch into. But then sometimes some of us are consciously we over switch and we feel like we're losing ourselves in a corporate environment, in a business environment, in a leadership environment. And that's problematic, because then that means there isn't enough pride and confidence in who you organically are. And that's the work essentially of Birthright that, my own life has experiences have informed the mission of Birthright Africa to ensure that we're instilling that pride and confidence so that we don't feel like our futures are limited by anything, and that we are able to aspire to our highest heights of leadership and entrepreneurship.
That's beautiful. There's a lot of good things that you touched on there, that the value of education is really important, and it's not just really for the community over here, the African American community, and everyone in general over here. But even for those of us coming from the continent, because I remember why, now it's now I can look back and I can start picking, start seeing places when the seeds started growing. But then I wouldn't realize that, this is when it started occurring. But one of it just when you were talking about the education, and then I just remember the book that I read. I think I was 16 or 15 or 16. And my uncle used to have a large library from everything, and I just went through everything. I never liked reading my school books. That's why I was never like the most. I never did really well in school, but I loved reading, just not my school books. And I went through the whole library. I read romantic novels. I won't admit it in front of the boys back then, but I read romantic novels, sci-fi, Western. I don't even know why he had all those books, but he had everything. And then there was a book that I saw. It said West African history from either the 1st to the 12th century or something. But it was really old history. Old book that some pages were even falling off back then. I don't even think he even realized that he had that book. And I started reading the book. And it involved history about it. I was like, wow, all this stuff happened. We had all this stuff. But 15, 16-year-old, all your mindset was the white man came and gave you civilization. That's what I've been told. That's what my...
And that's unfortunately the education even in Africa, I'm understanding.
Yeah.
It's so sad. Yeah.
Now I start reading this book and it's like, but so something obviously was happening then. But in that stage of, I don't want to be bored, I guess I still went through and read the whole book. But it was in that book that was the first time I ever read of the British bombing my village. When they tried to start taxing them during the palm oil deals, and my village said, "Well, what the hell, you guys? We don't want to know you help. No, we don't want to. This is our prize. We want to pay." And they didn't really have much details on King Jaja of Opobo, who's like the very first guy from amongst the monarchs of West Africa who figured out I don't need the middleman and got his own ship and took his produce straight to Liverpool. And if based on the economics of back then, he would have been a billionaire within a year. Yeah. Because he just cut them out. That's why he had to be exiled. And they tricked him into the ship. But what they told us in school was that, King Jaja of Opobo had a conflict with the British. What was the conflict about? I don't know. But the British, but they mentioned the trick that he got tricked into the ship and then got exiled. They mentioned that part, at least. But it didn't make sense, but we got tested on that. And he got tricked. Why did he get tricked? Why would you be tricked in your own country, on your own land, your own kingdom? You got tricked out of your kingdom and got exiled. But as kids, kids won't think about it. It didn't make sense. But all those stuff stayed in me. And then now I'm reading this book that my village got bombed. Well, why is that not in the history books? It's a book that's by somebody who I don't...
Yeah. Listen.
Down the line, we start hearing about I think one day I was with my fellow tribal men in New Jersey, and I bring that up like, did you ever know about the British bombing our my village? And someone around, a professor say, oh yes, and then he starts talking about it and he's bringing more information. I'm like, how many kids back home do you think know about this?
Right.
Because everybody glorifies the colonialism like it was the best thing ever.
That thing that happened to us, when in fact it's what destroyed us.
And they make it sound like it was so smooth, because that's another thing. With the Nigerian books, it sounded like they just came and everything would say, oh, here you go, take over. Except for the Benin Empire. The Benin people have, that story is always one story from the Benin Empire, which was somehow referenced in the Black Panther movie when Killmonger was looking at the masks and he asked about how they got that mask. Queen Overaman's mask was what it was.
I remember.
That story of how they got that mask was taught I went to school in Benin City. So I don't know if it's only Benin City that teaches that in their history, but it was mentioned in the schools because they weren't supposed to come for a trade talk, and they insisted on visiting when the Oba doesn't see people around that time of the year.
Right.
And his chiefs took it on themselves to kill the British that came.
Yeah.
In retaliation, they ransacked the palace and then that's how they took everything and took that mask.
Basically, the issue is there's this omission in the history of who we were as, kings, queens, innovators, creators. It was the Europeans that came and learned from us and realized how skilled we were and decided to just rob us of that value, right? So rob us of the resources, colonize, well, first enslave, because you have to rip the people. They're not going to just willingly go. And they needed, our skills to develop the lands in the new world.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the things that shifts also is that you understand your value. Like, we're walking around not realizing how valuable and, how much worth is in who we are as a people, because that was stripped away and the stories are not being told that we were skilled.
Exactly.
And that's why there was enslavement and colonization. Just that shifts your pride.
Oh, yeah.
And so, a lot of us are walking around not understanding the value of the culture and the history we come from. And I can even speak for myself. I was very proud to assimilate into American culture and away from being Sudanese. Like, it was that bad, right? And a lot of us are going through this crisis, identity crisis, and not even realizing that this escapism, like, America becomes an escapism of identity, of collective identity. So I can have this individual identity and freedom. I'm also growing up as a girl child in Arab Muslim culture, in an American society. So I feel oppressed, right? Because I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do this, based on culture. So I'm like, why do I want to be all Sudanese? Even though my parents are like, you're Sudanese, you're not American, you're not even Black American. At 12 years old, I'm like, what are they talking about? I only know American and Sudanese. I now realize all that subliminal messaging they got through the media and how, Black people in America are portrayed as poor, lazy, dangerous, boom, boom, boom. So they've had their education, and I'm glad to say they're on the other side of it. And luckily, there's a hunger to know who we are as a people, because we're also seeing those roots of racism are popping back up, right? In a very overt way. And so Birthright Africa couldn't come at a better time, right? I actually took the time to make sure I understood what this mission needed to be over 10 years. I registered the website in 2007 and didn't feel ready. I was like, I need to prepare myself not only with the knowledge, but the leadership skills to build an organization and set it up in a way that it would not only speak to everyone, but actually involve everyone on an action-based level. So basically, I got my MBA, made sure that I felt like I had, access and understanding of the education system. So I ended up working in college and career readiness for 10 years, which is what you mentioned in my background, because I knew this was an educational mission just centered on culture. And so we call it a heritage-based leadership program. And it's, in essence, it's leveraging travel and exposure. First, starting in the United States, right? We partner with high schools, colleges, and community-based organizations as our education partners, where these youth and young adults of African descent already are, and where we can source the facilitators who themselves want to go on this journey, who are also trying to catch up as African descended leaders to who they really are and where they come from.
Yep.
And we explore locally, nationally within the US before it culminates on the continent to a nation in Africa, like Ghana, South Africa. There's, we have targets for our groups to go to Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, but we are open to any African nation that's deemed safe to travel.
Okay.
By the State Department. Obviously, once the crisis lets up, and in the meantime, we're doing a lot of virtual programming. So still sign up for our newsletters and get young people to register with us as scholars. We just want to house the database of who we know is interested. So as we build these Birthright programs around the country, with Birthright Africa being an umbrella organization that helps each program create the model and have the impact that it needs to have, And that impact is life-changing. I mean, we are instilling young people as young as 13 up to the age of 30 in this critical time of identity development, cultural development, with the knowledge, even the skill sets about what it means to take pride and confidence and use that for your future. So in addition to going to cultural sites, museums, our university partners, that HBCUs, we visit leaders and entrepreneurs of African descent in their places of work as our innovation partners to demonstrate what it looks like to leverage this pride, confidence, creativity, and connection to who you are and use it to drive your future. And a big piece of that being your career. Leveraging and monetizing on our culture, which we know is so valuable, right? So full circle, if you understand the value of who we've always been since the beginning of a time, and we've been creators and entrepreneurs from the very beginning with our villages in Africa to our entrepreneurs like Madam C.J. Walker, Carter G. Woodson, even in times of enslavement and colonization,
True.
Right? If you know and hear those stories past, now you hear from the leaders and entrepreneurs present. I'm talking about the vice presidents of an HBO or the tech founder who's raising millions of dollars. Like, this is who you can be, right? To see it in order to believe it. And then now you have access to this ecosystem, this new birthright global village. We call ourselves the Birthright Tribe of people who are, really involved in this birthright mission, whether it's through programs, donations, volunteering your time. And our leaders and our entrepreneurs represent the vision that we have for our young scholars to become these global leaders and entrepreneurs that are proud of their African heritage, really confident in their innovative aspirations as this economy becomes more and more, and we're seeing it now with virtual everything.
Yes.
Right? You have to be in a creative, innovative space and also connected to the continent, because the continent is part of this future. They go over there and they see all these leaders and entrepreneurs on the continent that are thriving. It's not war, poverty, and disease.
Oh, no.
You start realizing, two of my young scholars were like, it's all been a lie. Like, all of it growing up, their misperceptions. Every single one of these young people want to go back multiple times to multiple countries, can even see themselves living and working there. Not just the college students. I'm talking about the high school students from one visit. So imagine this mission as we scale and grow sustainably over time. It's really about ultimately seeing that you don't have to succumb to the systems of oppression and racism, that we are clear, are in place, but we can recreate this collective across, right, between the continent and the diaspora, and really continue to engage in this cultural exchange, and for future tourism, investment, living, marriage, children, families, like all of that is starting to happen, and it's just going to happen in a grander scale. And honestly, America is just one choice of places to live.
Thank you. That's true. That's true. I follow. It's called the Black Experience Japan. He interviews diaspora Black diaspora that moved to Japan, and now he has expanded to other Asian countries. Just before the virus struck, the Africans who he's talked to is a YouTube channel, and it's. I tell people, like, some people message me like, "Hey, I want to come to America," and I said, "Look, based on your background, I think it'll be easier for you to move to one of those countries. Watch one of those videos, and I'll send them videos, and some get it, some don't." But I'm like, I understand, because based on the wiring that we've had I was under that wiring for a long time.
Brainwashing, yes.
It's just where I do to think one way and to look at only one option. But when you start seeing people who got themselves out and said, "Hey, what is happening in this place? I want to go to this part of the world." And I remember, because I used to be in the Navy, and I remember even in the Navy, I met people who still hadn't come to that consciousness per se.
Mhm.
But their first trip to Africa on a ship, and the Navy sent them there, and they were like, "Oh, my life changed," and I was surprised, and I was surprised they had this, they had nice looking buildings, and I'm like, okay, well, what do you expect? And then when they were talking to me, like the first time I had to give a command briefing,
Mhm.
and then I'd barely been in the United States up to a year, and I handled the briefing like 30 minutes lecture to the whole command. And I was done, and someone ran up to me. I was like, "Oh yeah, hey man, how long have you been in the United States?" I said, "Less than a year." Like, wow, you speak English so good. America's done something good for you, man.
Oh Lord.
And I was like, okay, well, you ever heard of something called education? He said, yeah. I said, yeah, other countries have it. Bye. And I walked away, and he was like, wow, wow, okay. I don't think he got what I was saying.
Yeah.
And people like that, we're like, oh, I remember one day someone came into our office and was like, wow, I just found out that Nigeria has about 37 universities. Wow. I said, you're not counting the private universities. That's just...
Hold on. Even better fun fact. Nigerian Americans are the most educated group of Americans in America.
Oh, yeah.
It's not the generational Americans that have been here since the beginning.
I normally don't I normally don't bring that up because I've seen Nigerian Americans use that also in the I call it the success bubble.
Okay.
Because we've hit that success, and then we are living the American dream, so we don't need to involve ourselves in anything
in homeland.
No, not just homeland, but here in like the struggle. I use
oh yeah. No, I hear you. That's the white consciousness.
The white consciousness, yes.
Because you
so
think
like, I had a cousin who she used to get mad at me back in the days anytime I posted about Black Lives Matter. And she'd be like, oh, you need to stop, you need to stop. It's not the police fault and all that. And then a Nigerian born gets shot in Georgia. And she went mad about it, and how dare these police, they don't think. I said, so what?
That's the point
about that. Now, so when a Nigerian gets the we should now get mad. Is that when we get involved? We should wait until we are the victims.
Exactly.
It's people's fault all this time, and that's why. And then another friend of mine, he's a good friend of mine. He didn't get it at first. And we had this clash, and then I told him when I used to talk about Black Lives Matter, he said, "Oh, that's the Black Americans' fault." And then later on, he will come to me like, "Oh, the police in Nigeria are overstepping. They're killing Nigerians and all this." And I say, "Okay, so you remember when we had this conversation about the police in America?"
Yep.
So, well, what are you telling me now? It's police brutality in Nigeria. That's not right. That's not good, right? He said, "Oh, I see why." I said, now you get it. Now you get why I'm calling for police accountability.
It all comes back to, listen, it all gets back to value and self-value.
Yes.
Right? If you understand your self-value and the history that you carry, you also see that there's such a commonality between us as African descended people. We specifically use that term, youth and young adults of African descent, because our cohorts are made up of everyone. And luckily, Generation X and below, we've gone to school and worked together. But you will have African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, Afro-Latinx, and even continental Africans like myself who grew up in America. Because we share these stories and then realize we're dealing a lot of times with the same pain and even the different pain that we've inflicted on each other. But, all that to say, it's about a re-education and a healing.
Yes.
In a lot of ways, this mission is about healing those wounds of feeling separate, of not understanding our brothers and sisters on the other side. And once we visit, right, especially it's just easier right now from the US to go over there.
Yeah.
They begin to understand also. I'm hoping when we go to the African nations and we see it, because they ask us, why are you guys coming here? Or they know to some degree, but it's kind of like they have this aspiration to come to America. Yep. So they don't understand why we're always so intrigued about going. And then we break it down and we explain the systemic issues and we explain how we're not being educated about who we are. We don't know what Africa looks like. The media just tells us war, poverty, disease. And then they're so welcoming. And what I'm also seeing more and more of, that we're going to be a part of that movement, is continental Africans like myself who grew up in America now see ourselves living there. So we're going to go back as a diaspora purposely. So I hope that helps African young people who don't necessarily want to leave, but think for some reason they have to, that they don't have to. You, like, if we're coming back,
they have the option of.
You have the option. It's all about options. Economics is options and choices. If we come back as a diaspora and we collaborate with you, you have a better understanding of the cultural context. We may have some certain skills or whatever and money to bring to start businesses and create jobs. Let's work together. All about the power of being together. And I feel and I hope as more and more of us, and I'm telling you, there are tons of us that are like, we out. Like, I've been telling people since 2012, get your backup country ready. And as a Black person, Africa is one of the choices. I personally have decided that 2021 is when I make a shift to live more on the continent for three months to 6 months at a time. I see myself back and forth, obviously, because of the mission. And I'm never going to let go of being an American. I still see the value in having individual self-expression within the context of and a pride in my collective culture and history. You know what I'm saying? It's the two together that really make you powerful. Unfortunately, American capitalism can be so extreme on the individualistic side that you lose the sense of community and giving back sometimes and think you're good to go with just living your own life. Collectivist culture can sometimes be too extreme on the other, where you're over-sacrificing for the community and the collective, including yourself and your own aspirations and pursuits. But together, that's the advantage of being an immigrant in America. You have this context, and all we're doing now is ensuring that any youth and young adult of African descent understands there is this duality, that it's such an advantage, and you can find yourself anywhere in the world, depending on what vision and purpose you set for yourself. And Birthright Africa will always be a place for you to come, get resources, access to networks and people. Essentially, like I said, we're this ecosystem, and we have everyone consider what their legacy of innovation is. Like, now that you know who you are and where you come from, you see the present version of us building our legacies through our leaders and entrepreneurs of African descent. You are the future. What is your future legacy of innovation? And with that, I mean, I can't imagine, I just can't wait for another 5-10 years once more and more of this mission just becomes a part of the culture. We want every young person growing up knowing that their birthright experience is waiting for them.
Yes.
And so just join us on the movement at Birthright Africa on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. You can donate if, once you get your millions. Raphael, I'm counting on you. I heard you saying it already.
I will. Once I get my million, if my million's coming right now, it's going to you guys. Straight up.
We really believe the high net worth. We really want to speak to the high net worth and high influence people of Africa.
I have somebody that I will send you his contact. I believe he's good for you guys. He's in New York.
We want this to be a for us, by us mission. Like I wholeheartedly believe, and we are getting closer and closer to having those high net worth, high influence people that are going to be on our boards, or just giving us those, big donations where they know they're going to impact 10 to 20 young people at a time. They can pick whatever country they want that young person to go, be a part of the program. Any leader and entrepreneur of African descent who has a story to tell about how they got to be who they are and how they connect to their pride and ancestry can be a part of the Birthright program.
Awesome.
Like, it's literally set up that way. Any education partner, any high school, college, community-based organization can reach out to us to develop the Birthright program within their organization. When I say I set this up with everyone having an opportunity to be involved, literally, it's the village. I said, we don't have to recreate this. There's people who've been going to Africa for a while. What we're doing is institutionalizing it. And we want to be the ones at Birthright Africa that help ensure that it's sustainable through funding.
So 2 quick questions to wrap it up. What would you say to, because I have someone who's dear to me, and she belongs to the LGBT community, and she also has, she's not in the age bracket, but she also belongs to one of those who like to return back to Africa, and but there's this fear of, I'm not going to be accepted,
right,
in Africa. And so I know of youths, who fall into that category. So if one of them, if they ask like, okay, how would I be accepted, or do I belong to an organization like this? What do you say to them?
We've had young people who identify in the different spectrum of orientation. Ultimately, we have to understand and be safe, right? So we find out what the law is. And if there is a law against homosexuality, then it's just something that you can't express, unfortunately. So as long as you can be comfortable in not having to express that part of yourself in certain places, right? Because we know there's countries that are starting to develop in this area, right? Afro-punk, which has a whole bunch of different types of people and orientations going to South Africa. There's certain safe spaces. We've had a facilitator who identifies as gay, but you can be safe because we always run as a group. We're always together. Our age range, it requires that. Obviously, we give some flexibilities for people to, go out as they're older, if they're older, with certain curfews in mind. But ultimately, you can go to the continent. They're just seeing you as a Black person. Just understand that is the main identity that you are expressing and connecting over to stay safe.
All right. And with the current changes in Sudan, which women and youths played an active role in making happen.
70% of the protesters were women.
Yeah, that's why I always give them a shout out. And just last week, female genital mutilation was finally outlawed.
Yes, I read that.
Transitional government. And so with all the changes happening in Sudan, now looking better now looking good to be a possible country destination in the future?
Yep, absolutely. I've been saying I'm just waiting for things to calm down a little bit more. Yeah. But I am so proud of my Sudanese heritage. I gave myself, I realized, my own birthright to Sudan in December 2018. When I went at the age of 39 for the first time on my own. Every time prior to that was because of family. But I wanted on my own. And I had a friend's wedding. She was Sudanese American. I was able to see how she reconciled her culture, how her parents ensured that they instilled the pride. We got to go to the pyramids in Sudan. I sailed on the Nile for the first time. And I dictated my experience. And I was like, I can do this. I want to come home now more often, at least every couple of years. So my plan is to go back. Inshallah, we can travel at the end of this month because I connected to the culture in a way that I never, ever in a million years, if you had told me 20 years ago that this is the way I would be thinking about myself and my heritage, I would have never told you I was going to be thinking about, traveling to Sudan this often. My parents have built a house there. I could see myself staying there for maybe a month or so at a time, maybe having a business. Like I said, working with my cousins who understand the cultural context. I may come from different skill sets, financial means to be able to, have economic opportunity happen. And it's like a full circle moment because my parents came to America, right, to escape and to build educational economic opportunity. I, in a lot of ways, see myself escaping some of the oppression here in America to feel I can fulfill on some of my highest, aspirations back home on the continent. And not only in Sudan, I could see myself in Ghana. I haven't visited Senegal yet, but as a Muslim, as a liberal Muslim, I hear it's amazing.
Oh, Senegal, yeah.
Everyone loves it over there. I can't wait.
To Dakar. He just got out of the Navy. We're in the Navy together, and he got out.
Yeah.
January, and he literally just moved straight back to Dakar.
Yeah. And so it's like moving and living there is something I'm so looking forward to. And again, Birthright Africa was just something I knew I needed. And I was like, if I need it, with all the international exposure I had and the quality education, and I was a good student, but realizing how much there was omitted in my education, I was like, if I need this, a whole bunch of us must need it. So I knew I was building this for the culture. And now the same idea is like, I can be, again, a model, an example of going back to the continent and making it possible and achievable for the rest of us to see it as a choice.
That's beautiful. I think we'll end there. And finally, to leave, do you have a word of advice for the audience? Could be a mantra that you live by, or a quote from a book that you've read, from one of your favorite songs that you dance to. You want to leave us with, but just something for the audience.
Oh, wow. I'll give you my very most recent mantra now that I'm really starting to live by. It just happened for me in the last couple of days. You can imagine, as someone who is visionary, who, works hard to achieve something that isn't in existence yet, right? Which a lot of us as entrepreneurs do. I believe in being able to achieve whatever you feel your purpose is, and things will come to you. The universe will respond with the right people, the right information, the right money. So I've had that, but I'm believing that in a whole nother level. And right now I'm saying to myself, I can manifest anything.
Wow. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I think I'll borrow that one.
You'll borrow that? Sure. Yes. I borrow all the time.
So thank you, Walla, for coming on the pod. Shukran. I still remember my
name. Afwan. Yes. Thank you.
So can you leave the audience with plugins on how to get in touch with Birthright Africa?
Sure. So we are at Birthright Africa on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. You can sign up to our newsletter on our website, www.birthrightatafrica.org, and look out for our virtual programming. If you know young people of African descent that want this experience, have them register on our website. They can go to the main site and look for our frequently asked questions. There you can have young people register. Education partners can reach out to us with interest in partnering. If you're interested in volunteering, you can just send us a message and we will do our best to get back to you as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'll probably be registering to volunteer.
Oh, yeah. We need to have you on one of these panels, whether it's virtual or in person, because the work, you're representing the vision and the mission of Birthright.
I'll be honored to. It'll be my honor. So, shukran again. And
welcome. Thank you for this important conversation.
My pleasure. And shout out to everyone listening. Don't forget to share this episode with your friends and families and loved ones, and keep the love going. And thank you for the privilege of your company. See you at the next episode. Thanks for listening to White Label American. If you enjoyed the show, we'll appreciate if you rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast from. If you have any questions, comments, or have someone who will be a good guest on the show, or you want to be on the show, send us a message at whitelabelamerican@gmail.com. And make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at White Label American. Thank you for your support.